John chapter 11. You maybe have heard a lot about near-death experiences, and it seemed to be like there was a real wave of near-death experience books out and testimonies, and I read one the other day. I'll read it for you. A middle-aged woman had a heart attack and was taken to the hospital. While on the operating table, she had a near-death experience. Seeing God, she asked, "Is my time up?" And God said, "No. You have another 40 years, 2 months, and 8 days to live." Well, upon recovery, the woman decided to stay in the hospital and have a facelift, liposuction, rhinoplasty, and a tummy tuck. She even had someone come in and change her hair color. Since she had so much more time to live, she figured she might as well make the most of it. But after her last operation with the plastic surgeon, and she was released from the hospital, while walking across the street on her way to her car, she was struck by an ambulance and killed. And so now she arrives in front of God, and she demands, "I thought you said I had another 40 years, 2 months, and 8 days to live. Why didn't you pull me away from the path of that ambulance?" And God replied, "I'm sorry, I just didn't recognize you." Now, I hope you figured out that's not a true story. I tried to tell it in the beginning like it was a true story to make you listen, but it really wasn't a true story. But John chapter 11 is about not just a near-death experience. The best friend of Jesus was dead, Lazarus. And this might be the capstone miracle of the miracle ministry of Jesus, raising Lazarus from the dead. Now, in the Bible, there are several other instances where someone was raised from the dead. In the ministry of Elijah, he raised a young boy from the dead. In the ministry of Elisha, he raised a child from the dead. And even his bones, when a dead body touched his bones, came back to life. And we've seen Jesus in Mark chapter 4, Jairus' daughter, raised from the dead. Luke chapter 7, Jesus is traveling into a town by the name of Nain, and he sees a funeral procession going by, and he's moved with compassion for the mother of the young man who died. So he touches the body, and the body comes back to life. I mean, these are incredible things. And when Jesus sent out his disciples to preach the kingdom, he said, "Heal the sick, raise the dead." Now, we don't have any record that when they were going out that they raised the dead, but we know later on in the book of Acts, Peter prayed for Dorcas, and she was raised from the dead. But John chapter 11 is unique in some ways in that the man that was raised from the dead was what I've called the best friend of Jesus. Lazarus was a very close personal friend of Jesus. And not only that, but he had been dead and in the tomb for 4 whole days. So much so that when Jesus finally arrived there, Martha said, "Well, if you roll away the stone, it's going to stink. He's been in there 4 days." They anticipated that process of decay had begun, and it's going to stink. And this is just a phenomenal miracle. It's also the last straw for the religious leaders. Later on in the chapter 11, after Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, and they get together and they say, "Now we've got to kill him. And we got to do something about Lazarus now too." Now the conspiracy is strong. Now it's set in motion. He's going to die. They're going to see to that. And so this was like the last straw to the religious leaders. But what I want to look at today is, what does this miracle mean to us here today? So let's read. It's a longer text today, so follow along with me. John chapter 11. Now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore the sisters sent to him, saying, "Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick." When Jesus heard that, he said, "This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. Then after this he said to his disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, lately the Jews sought to stone you, and are you going there again?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if one walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him." These things he said, and after that he said to them, "Our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go that I may wake him up." Then his disciples said, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get well." However, Jesus spoke of his death, but they thought that he was speaking about taking rest in sleep. Then Jesus said to them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. Nevertheless, let us go to him." Then Thomas, who is called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go that we may die with him." So when Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had joined the women around Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Then Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him, but Mary was sitting in the house. Now Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?" And she said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who's come into the world." And when she had said these things, she went her way and secretly called Mary, her sister, saying, "The teacher has come and is calling for you." As soon as she heard that, she arose quickly and came to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the town, but was in the place where Martha met him. Then the Jews who were with her in the house and comforting her, when they saw that Mary rose up quickly and went out, followed her, saying, "She's going to the tomb to weep there." Then when Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she fell down at his feet, saying to him, "Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died." Therefore, when Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who came with her weeping, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" And some of them said, "Could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind also have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again groaning in himself, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of him who was dead, said to him, "Lord, by this time there's a stench, for he's been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God?" Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying. Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you heard me, and I know that you always hear me. Because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me." Now when he said these things, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth." And he who had died came out, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Loose him and let him go." Now there's much more in the chapter. The rest of the chapter basically is how people are reacting to this. There are many that believed. Many put their faith in Jesus as Messiah, as Christ, the sent one from God. But then the Pharisees, the scribes, religious leaders, they got together, and now they're conspiring, they're plotting. We've got to kill him. So this really is a turning point. Jesus has reached the apex of his miracle ministry, and now it's on to Jerusalem for crucifixion. The stage is all set. Many are believing, but the religious leaders have made up their mind. This man, Jesus, is going to die. Even Caiaphas, the high priest, is in on it. And so there's no turning back now. But the reason I want to talk about this miracle today is about how it affects us, how it reveals something in all of us. And I call it simply the if-onlys. Did you notice Martha's reaction, Mary's reaction? Their reaction when they first met Jesus was, if only you had been here, he would not have died. Now, I want to point out that these women are sold out for Jesus. We're not talking about carnal believers. We're not talking about people who follow Jesus from a distance, or they call themselves Christians only for what they can gain. That's not who we're talking about. Mary is the one cited earlier in this text. She is the one who took that alabaster box and breaking it, meaning you'll never get this precious ointment, very valuable, probably a year's wages. You'll never get it back. And she pours it on Jesus, and she uses her tears in her hair to wash his feet. And Jesus said, is wherever the gospel is proclaimed, this woman is going to be remembered. So we're not talking about those who are just into easy believism or consumer Christianity. What can I get? No, we're talking about those that are devoted. These ladies were sold out for Jesus. And they had a special relationship. Notice they said, Lord, when they sent word, the one you love, he's sick. And the Bible even makes a note. Jesus loved Martha, Mary, Lazarus. We know he loves everybody, but there was a particular, a specific, a deeper love for this family. And now when he shows up, they say, if only you'd been here, if only you'd come through. And I believe that speaks to us of those times in our lives where we don't want to admit it, but we feel like God let us down. We feel like God didn't come through. We don't want to admit it because we want people to think we're sincere believers, and we are, just like Mary and Martha. They were sincere, devoted followers of Jesus, but they still wrestled with this issue of, you didn't come through. And so if they wrestled with it, there are times when I'm sure we will wrestle with it also. Look at verse 21. Now Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if only you'd been here, my brother would not have died. First thing out of her mouth. Then he goes and meets Mary. Verse 32. If only you had been here, my brother would not have died. First thing out of her mouth. And all those Jews that were comforting the sisters, they come with him, with her rather, and then they see Jesus weeping, and they say this. They say, well, isn't the one who opened the blind eyes, couldn't he have kept this guy from dying? You know what they're saying? They're saying, hey, he didn't come through. If only he had showed up when they asked him to show up, Lazarus wouldn't have died. Have you ever felt like that? Have you ever felt like, God, why didn't you answer my prayer? I mean, I was devout in praying it. And I'll just speak. Maybe you don't want to admit, but I'll admit I felt like this. I can think of something I prayed for literally every day for years. And it didn't happen. The opposite happened. And I got to admit to you, I wrestled with that. Lord, how did you let this happen? It wasn't like I didn't pray about it. I prayed about it every day for years. And the opposite happened. And there's this sense of, no, I know it's not right to say we should blame God, but aren't there times when you kind of feel that way? Like, what happened here, God? How come you didn't come through? How come he died? So many people praying. How come, Lord? The if-onlys. If only you'd been here. If only you'd come through. As a matter of fact, kind of what we're saying is, if only you'd done what I told you to do. Well, I want to just share 3 truths today from this text. And they're not very profound. They're very simple. Well, maybe the simple is profound, but I just want to share them with you today to help you get through those if-only times. I recall taking a walk with a man that had told me before that he had felt a call into the ministry, and he went and he prepared in school, seminary, whatever, and he prepared for ministry. He never quite got there. He loved God. He was sincere. He was a good man. He took care of his family. He attended church. He got involved. But there was something that he himself would say, I always fell short of. And finally, on this walk, he opened up to me. He said, Mark, and I could see he was even shaking when he said it. He said, I don't even know if I should come out and say this, but how can I serve a God who would let that happen? And he was referring to when his son was killed by a drunk driver. Man, that impacted him. How could it not impact us? But then somehow we direct that toward God. How could you let that happen? Why didn't you come through? Where was your Psalm 91 and all these protections? Where is that, Lord? And not to say that we don't believe in Psalm 91, but there are times when stuff happens. And one of the emotions we wrestle with is, if only you'd been there, wouldn't have happened. I ask you to be there. Martha and Mary had sent a messenger to Jesus. The one whom you love is sick. The inference is he's about to die. And what does Jesus do? Nothing. Shudder to say this, but Jesus let him die. Jesus let him die. If only you had been here. Now, I've got to imagine, since that's the first recorded words of both Mary and Martha, I bet they said that to each other. If only he had showed up, Lazarus wouldn't be dead. If only he'd come. We sent for him. I'm sure he got the message. Why didn't he show up? If only he'd been here. Couldn't the one who opened the eyes of the blind, couldn't he have kept this man from dying? You feel as if God didn't come through for you. And the key word there is, you feel. I'm not saying that's true. I'm just saying that's what we feel. Now let me give you those three things that I hope we can hang on to when we're going in and through one of those if only times in our lives. Number one, you can fill it in on your study guide. Jesus knows what he's doing. Jesus knows what he's doing. And when we give him this if only statement, what we're basically saying is, Lord, you didn't do what I asked you to do. And what's underlying that is that I think I know what God should have done, and you didn't listen to me. Well, guess what? God has done very well for centuries without my opinion. He's done very well in creation and very well throughout running this universe for centuries without my advice. But somehow when it comes to what I'm hurting for and what I'm dealing with, I want to prescribe to him what he should do. If only you'd been here. If only you had done what I asked you to do. But we need to be reminded that Jesus knows what he is doing. Where in the text is it recorded that someone sent him a second message that Lazarus was dead? And yet he knows that Lazarus is dead. And here's the reaction of Jesus. And it baffles us. And it goes against all much of the contemporary teaching that we hear so often. But look at verse 6. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days. He knows that Lazarus is dying. Why doesn't he just rush right over there, drop everything else was going on, and get there? He stayed. He knew what he was doing. He purposely. And that's letter A, a planned delay. But let me make a statement before we deal with a planned delay. He knows what he is doing. God has a plan for your ultimate and your eternal good, and it includes pain. That's one of the most important statements you can ever grab onto. I'll say it again. It's on your study guide. Fill it in. God has a plan for your ultimate, might not be seeming that way right at the moment, but God has a plan for your ultimate, and it goes beyond this lifetime, and eternal, for your ultimate and your eternal good. And it includes pain. We cannot leave that last statement out. And it includes pain. Pain is a part of God's plan for your life. You know, the little tracts we hand out, God has a wonderful plan for your life. We're tempted when we hand that out and we witness the people to leave out that pain part. And it includes pain. God has a plan for your ultimate and your eternal, meaning we need to think beyond this lifetime and see ourselves as eternal creatures. We're creatures because we're created, and he created us to be eternal. And so God has a plan for our ultimate and our eternal good. And it includes pain. And you will never get to the ultimate and eternal good if you try always to bypass the pain. Jeremiah 29:11, a common verse, and I believe it's one we can embrace. For I know the thoughts, plans that I think toward you. They are thoughts of peace and not evil, to give you a future and a hope. The Hebrew word for thought and plan is the same. His thoughts are his plan. God doesn't just think about something. His thought is his plan. God's thoughts are his plan. And his thoughts towards you are good, and they are not evil. It's for a hope. It's for a future. It's unto an expected end. God has a plan. And it is for your ultimate and eternal good, and it includes pain. And so when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed. He let him die. He knew there would be pain. He somehow knew that Lazarus had died. He described it as sleep. Lazarus is sleeping. Well, if he's sleeping, then he'll be all right. See, they didn't want to go to Judea again because they knew back from John chapter 9 and 8. Remember, chapter 8 and 9, we studied it not long ago. They wanted to stone him because he did a miracle on the Sabbath. They wanted to stone him. And so, and by the way, did you catch this about Thomas? Let's give Thomas a little credit here. We always call Thomas, what do we call Thomas? Was he doubting here? Let's go there and die with him. That guy had some courage. That guy had some devotion. That guy had some love. I don't want to call him doubting anymore. He was willing to go die with Jesus. Let's go die with him. Wow, what an attitude that is. Let's go die with him. And so they knew that going back into Judea around Jerusalem was dangerous, but now somehow Jesus knows that Lazarus is asleep, meaning dead, but I go that I might awake him. And then they say, well, Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get well. I can just see Jesus shaking his head. These guys don't get it. So he comes right out and says, he's dead. He's dead. I just got to throw this in. I saw one of the funniest birthday cards I ever saw. Was two Bible characters. You can tell they're Bible characters, they have sandals on, robes. They look like they're Bible characters. And one of them saying to the others, I didn't forget. I really didn't forget. I was dead. I swear, I was dead. And the caption underneath is Lazarus explaining to his friend why he missed his birthday. I really was dead. I didn't forget. But Jesus says, he's sleeping. It was a planned delay. Jesus knew what he was doing. Psalm 31:5. My times are in your hand, O Lord. Can you and I really say that? Do we really mean that? Do we trust the Lord with that? Or do we try to give God our schedule that we have designed? Our times are in your hand, O God. Jesus has a plan for you. And Jesus had a plan. Notice what he said in describing his death. He says he's asleep. So A is a plan delay. B, a perspective different. Jesus has a different perspective on what you're going through than what you have. We see death as the end. He sees death as a nap that we will wake up from. We see death as that ultimate bad thing that could ever happen in our life. We see it as the end. He doesn't see it that way at all. He sees it as sleep. And I'm not teaching that doctrine of soul sleep. That's not my intent. My intent is simply to show you that the perspective of Jesus to what has just happened is far different than their perspective, and perhaps his perspective on what's happening in your life is different than how you're perceiving it. He sees it as a temporary nap. We see it as the end. I remember going into a hospital room, and the young lady in the hospital was a singer, and she aspired to be a professional singer, and her lungs collapsed. And so they took her to the hospital, and she's laying in the hospital. And when I walked in, she said, oh, Pastor, this is the worst thing that ever could have happened to me. This is absolutely the worst thing that ever could have happened to me. I said, what's the worst? She said, well, I have to be here in the hospital. I said, that's not the worst thing that could have happened to you. She said, well, what is? Oh, well, you could have died. You could never get out of this hospital. You could die in this hospital. And if you died in the hospital, what would that then mean? That would mean you'd go to heaven. So that's not the worst. And she just said, I thought you pastors were supposed to encourage us. You come here to tell me I could die? No, I said, I'm just trying to change your thinking. You're not going to die, but what's happened is not the worst thing anyway. See, sometimes we need God's perspective. Lazarus is dead. Well, in their minds, that means it's over. That's the worst. And Jesus said, no, he's just sleeping. He's asleep. Let's go wake him up. And you realize that the solution to your dilemma is that simple to him. Just go wake him up. And it doesn't seem simple to us, but it is that simple to him. Different perspective, number one, death as sleep. And we talked about this a few weeks ago, so I'm not going to get into that. But Paul had another different perspective in Philippians 1 on death. And he was in prison and not knowing for sure. I think he believed he would get out, but not knowing for sure whether this would be the end. He said, I'm torn between two things. Because if I live, I'm going to serve you. If I live, it's for your sake. But man, if I die, I'm going to heaven. And he summed it up by saying this, for me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. Is that your perspective? That if I'm alive, I'm going to serve Jesus Christ. But if I die, that's okay. It's even better. That's usually not our perspective. It's like, I'm going to hang on for whatever I can do to hang on. Paul said, no, if I live, I will do it for your sake, the church he meant. I'm going to serve Christ by serving you. But if I die, that's even gain. That's better. That's beyond. That's better. Oh, how we need that different perspective. Blessed are those who die in the Lord. They have ceased from their labors, and their works do follow them. Isaiah 55, that classic passage, my ways are higher than your ways. My thoughts are not your thoughts. They're higher than your thoughts. God has a plan, and a good part of the time, his plan is unknown to us. His plan, at least, is unclear to us, much of it. But we must hang on to this thought that he does indeed have a plan. And then thirdly, letter C on your outline. Not only was there a planned delay and a perspective different, but there is a purpose. C, purpose, and that purpose is a greater glory. He said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Later on, he had obviously said some more words to Martha, because he said, did I not say to you, if you would believe, you would see the glory of God? Didn't I tell you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God? These words of Jesus confronted me, because I had to ask myself, I had to evaluate my praying. Is my praying primarily about my relief? Or is it primarily about God's glory? If I were to analyze my ongoing prayers and the things that I ask God for, or even my prayers in a time of crisis when Lazarus has died, is the motive of my praying, is the purpose of my praying, God, I want out of this pain? Or is it, God, glorify yourself? What is the purpose of my praying? And the purpose of all that was happening here was the glory of God. And notice in chapter 11, our text, verse 15, Jesus says, in the verse before it, he says, Lazarus is dead, and I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. Many would come to faith. Many would come to believe. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, 17 and 18. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us an exceeding and eternal weight of glory, while we do not look at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal. What does he say about what you're going through? It is working for you, in you, a more eternal weight of glory. That's the perspective we've got to hang on to. We cited Paul earlier in Philippians 1. There in that jail, he said, I want you to know that even though people are preaching the gospel out of contention, their motives are not right. But I want you to know that everything that has happened to me, being turned over, being arrested, being thrown in jail, he said, it is turned out for the furtherance of the gospel. See, God had a purpose. God had a plan. Maybe we didn't see it. Maybe we didn't perceive it, but God had it. Romans 8:18, for I reckon that the sufferings of this present age are not worthy to be compared with the glory that shall be revealed in us. God has a plan for your ultimate and eternal good. And it includes pain. However, it ends in glory. And you've got to embrace that. I need to hang on to that. That even though God's plan for my life oftentimes includes pain, the ultimate purpose of God is glory. This sickness is not unto death, but unto the glory of God. In other words, what Jesus actually was not saying Lazarus wouldn't die. He's saying the end result of this sickness is not death. The end result of what's happening here will be the glory of God. Can we embrace that? Can we look beyond the pain and believe for the glory? Jesus knows what he's doing. Trust him. Point number 2. Jesus knows what you're feeling. Jesus knows what you're feeling. It was noted that all the ancient gods were powerful. Small g God. All the ancient gods were powerful, but none of them wept. One of the most profound verses in the Bible. And by the way, if you say, Pastor, I've never been able to memorize Scripture. I just can't memorize. Hey, I got one for you. Verse 35, I think you can handle it. Jesus wept. You can memorize that one. You can get that one down. Jesus wept. But in those simple 2 words, I believe is one of the most profound truths we can ever come across. Jesus wept. All the ancient gods were powerful, but none of them wept. None of them broke from the inside. Notice the emotions of Jesus. Verse 33 and 38 uses the word groan. And this word groan in the Greek, embromamai. It means a distress of spirit causing the body to tremble. It is a deep, strong feeling. And twice in this story, it tells that Jesus had this deep emotion, this groaning, that even something deep within him felt something so intense, he even shook a little bit. Groaning. It says in verse 33, not only did he groan, but he was troubled, terasso, and agitated, stirred. Something in his spirit was agitated. Something inside of him was stirred. He was troubled. And he tells you, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe in me. He knows what that troubling feels like. He felt that troubling. But the most powerful verse is verse 35. Jesus wept. This is not just, scratching the side of the eye and hoping they don't notice. This isn't just a watering of the eyes. This is an all-out bawling. This is the dam on the inside of the heart breaking and the water gushing all over the place. He wept. And I ask the question, why did Jesus weep? Now let me give you a few answers that people who have studied this, written about it, speculated about it have given. Number 1, he was weeping because he loved Lazarus. And Lazarus is dead. And that's what the onlookers, the Jewish onlookers thought when they saw Jesus weeping. They saw him weeping, and that's the conclusion they came to. Wow, he really loved Lazarus. Yet he knew that in just a few moments, he would be with his friend again. He knew all along he would raise Lazarus from the dead. So why would he weep because it's his friend who died, when he knows in just a few moments he will embrace him again? He said, I'm going to go wake him up. Then there's another reason that some speculate. He wept because he was burdened by their unbelief. He wept because he was burdened by their unbelief. Nobody was believing he'd do anything now. He showed up too late. Nothing can be done now. Well, yet, why would he weep because of their unbelief when he knew in just a few moments many of them would believe? Many of them would believe. And he said to his disciples, I'm glad I wasn't there for your sakes that you would believe. So I find it hard to believe he was weeping simply because of their unbelief when he knew he was going to bring them to faith. Well, number 3, speculation was, well, he was weeping because he felt what they were thinking, that they thought he failed them. I mean, how would you feel if everybody around thought, oh, this is his fault. Here comes the guy, this is his fault. Yet, he knew in a few moments he would amaze them. He knew in a few moments he would do something that would literally astound them. They would never in their lifetime before see such a thing, and not until his second return would they ever see such a thing again. He might momentarily be the one who failed them, but he was about to amaze them. He knew he was going to give them Lazarus back. So why would that be? Why he was weeping? Here's why I think he was weeping. He was weeping for one simple reason. They were weeping. Not that he's just caught up in the emotion, but here's the point I want you to just grapple with. And to me, it is not one that is simply easily received. I must grapple with it. And here's what it is. He loved them enough to enter their pain. Jesus, as the Creator, Jesus could speak a word and still a storm. Jesus could simply speak a word and take away their pain. But that would have cost him nothing. He chose rather to enter their pain. Jesus knows what you're feeling because while you are feeling, He is feeling it with you. He enters into your sorrow. He enters into your grief. Isaiah 53 prophesied of the coming Messiah that He would be acquainted with grief. He didn't need to grieve Lazarus. He knew He was going to bring him back from the dead. He knew He was going to amaze even the unbelievers. But He saw the sorrow of Martha. He saw the sorrow of Mary, and He loved them, and He was moved with compassion, so He entered into their grief. Next time you say, God, where were you when? He'll say, I was there with you. I was there. You didn't know it, but I was there. And I cried as many tears as you did. Jesus wept. Why is that in the Bible? Jesus wept. Because He is not a God that is afar off. He is a God that is so close, is so near. He's not just beside you. He enters in. He enters into your deepest, darkest pain and feels it with you. And through that, when the dust settles, when the darkness lifts, when the light shines again, that's why when the trial is over, you're so much closer to Him than you ever were before. Because He entered your pain. He's not a God who stays outside of our pain. He could have done that and it cost Him nothing. But He chose to enter your pain and it cost Him everything. He is God, and yet He has become man. And He feels what you feel as you are feeling it. Hebrews 4:15 says, He is touched with the feelings of our infirmities. Compassion means, the English word compassion means with passion, and passion has to do with suffering. He suffers with us. Sympathy means to enter into someone's suffering. We talk about the compassion of Jesus. We talk about the sympathy of Jesus. That means He enters our pain. He is more there than you know. He is closer to you than you realize. He is not just beside you with His arm around you. And in many ways we would think that would be enough. But it isn't. He's not just there beside you with His arm around you. He is inside your pain, feeling it with you. And even though you and I cannot perceive it, because He is inside our pain, feeling it with us, He is the one who is carrying us through. And many times we say, I don't know how I got through that. Now you do. He was there. He was there, and you couldn't feel him because of the pain, but he was there. And when you were not feeling him, he was feeling you. When you couldn't feel his presence, he was feeling your pain. He was there. Jesus wept because they were weeping. That's how much he cares. That's how much he loves. Isaiah 63:9, in all their affliction, he was afflicted. It was in his love and his pity that he redeemed them. And he bore them and he carried them. He feels what you feel. And he wants you to know what he feels. He feels this incredible, this intense love for you. That he would enter your pain. Jesus wept. Jesus wept. Jesus is not the cause of our pain. He is the comfort in our pain. And the word comfort in the Greek, paraklio, it means to call alongside. Every reference in John 14, 15, 16 talk about the comforter or the counselor. Sometimes it's translated. It's this word paraclete. And what it means is the one who calls alongside. The ministry of the Holy Spirit now to the believer is twofold. He's always calling you alongside Jesus, drawing you alongside Jesus, but he is also making the presence of Jesus felt inside of you. He calls Jesus' presence into our life. Blessed are those who mourn, they shall be called alongside. Blessed are those who mourn, they shall be comforted. He's called the God of all comfort. And Revelation 7 talks about this Lamb who's in the midst of the throne. He'll wipe away every tear. He's not only in the midst of the throne, he's in the midst of your pain. And in a time when we feel like Lazarus is dead and he didn't come through, we need to remind ourselves of one simple truth. You learned it in Sunday school. Jesus loves me. Jesus loves me. He loves me more than I will ever know. He loves me more than I could ever perceive. But he loves me. And he's here. And when I'm hurting, he weeps. Even though he knows what he will do, even though he knows what his plan is, he still weeps because you're weeping. That's how close, how intimate he wants to be in your life. How much does he love you? John 17:23, I in them and you in me, that they may be made perfect in one, and that the world may know that you have sent me and have loved them as you have loved me. God loves you as his son. God loves you as his son. And his son loves you enough to die and suffer wrath and suffer hell. Acquainted. Oh, that word doesn't do it justice. Acquainted with grief. It's way beyond just being acquainted. When you couldn't feel his presence, he was feeling your pain. He knows what you feel. And he's there. And he's carrying you. Last point. It's an awkward way to say it, but I just say it the way I think I can express it. He wants you to know who he is with you. I'm not concerned right now that you have a theology of who he is at the right hand of God. That's important, but that's not my point right now. My point right now is he wants you to know who he is with you. The first 2 points, he knows what he's doing. He knows what you're feeling, but now he wants you to know who he is with you. He says to Martha, in verses 21 through 27, he says, your brother will rise again. She's already expressed faith. I find a lot of faith in the statements of Martha here. Even that statement, if you had been here, he wouldn't have died. She believed that Jesus could have kept him from dying. How many of you agree? That's a little bit of faith right there. And then he says, your brother's going to rise again, and she believes in the future resurrection. Well, I know he's going to rise again on the last day, so she's believing for the future. But we're dealing with the present. And so he says, Martha, you don't know who is with you. You don't know who I am with you. I am with you right now. And I am the resurrection. I am the life. I don't just raise the dead, I am the resurrection. I don't just give life, I am the life. And I'm here present, right here with you now. Do you believe this? Look at her declaration. She had faith. Yes, Lord, verse 27, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who's come into the world. He wanted her to know who he was with her. He wanted her to know that the one that was with her right then, right there, was far more than she knew him to be. And the one who is with you right here, right now, is far, far more than we know him to be. I am the resurrection. I am the life. Go through the book of John. You can do this. They're in your study guide. Go through the book of John and just look at all the I ams. I am the bread. I am the shepherd. I am Messiah. I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. And just about anything you will ever need is in one of those I ams. It's who I am, and I'm with you now. It's all about his glory. And it's all about his drawing you unto himself. He wants you to know who he is with you. I close by telling you the story of Nard, and we'll close with this. Nard was a young boy, 6 years old, living on an island in the Philippines, the island of Luzon, in a village called Dibagat, in the island of Luzon, Philippines. When he was 6 years old, a different-looking man came into their village. He was taller than they were. He was pale-skinned. And they started some rough communication, and he made it known to them that he was there to learn their language. And so for the next 7 years, even though Nard was only 6 years old, Nard was the one that was willing to help this guy learn their language. 6 years old. And for 7 years, Nard helped this guy learn words in their language. And I'm sure he didn't know all what we know about grammar and all. He just taught him words, and he taught this guy their language. And when Nard was about 13 years old, this man, his name was Dick Rowe. Dick had to go back to the United States, but he then revealed to Nard what he was doing. He said, Nard, I have come here because I want to write a book in your language. It's God's story. It's the Creator God. It's the story of his love. And during those 7 years, Dick Rowe had translated the Gospel of Mark into Nard's native tongue, into their language, and he gave him a copy. He said, I'm going to go away. I'll be back in some time, but here's a copy of this book. And he gave him a copy of what we call the Book of Mark. So Dick Rowe leaves, and Nard, now he's 13 years old, he has this book. So he goes up to a high place. It was a very rocky place where he had to climb up. But he wanted to be alone, and he thought, I'm going to just sit here all day, and I'm going to read this book about this Creator, God. And it was the Gospel of Mark. And he was really excited when he read about Jesus doing all these miracles, and Jesus, a man of power. But when he got to the betrayal and the crucifixion, Nard said, I found myself being angry at this God. He became so angry, he took that copy of Mark and he threw it down off that high place, down into the rocks below. And he said, I do not want a God like this. I want a God that can protect me from the spirits. I want a God that can keep me from having to sacrifice my animals. I don't want a God that can't even take care of his own son. I don't want that God. And as he's climbing down the rocks, he felt and heard, rather, the voice of God speak to him and say, Nard, that book is the story of my love. My Son was giving himself for you. Nard was startled at this, and so he went back into the rocks and found the book, and he read the rest of the book. And he read about the resurrection, and he said, no one in our village, no one in our tribe, no one has ever come back from the dead, and no one has ever claimed to be able to bring somebody up out from the dead. Nard would go on to say, it was the resurrection story that changed my life. Why did Nard throw the book in anger? Why did Nard say, I don't want a God like that? Because he didn't know the rest of the story. And when you and I are feeling like God has let us down, when you and I are feeling like God didn't come through, we're feeling that way because we don't know the rest of the story. And the rest of the story is God does come through. He very seldom comes through how you think he will and when you think he will, but he will. And you too will know this sickness was not unto death, but unto the glory of God. And you'll turn around with what we call perfect hindsight, and you'll look behind you, and you'll say, I don't know how I got through that. And then you'll realize Jesus wept. That's how you got through. He was with you. More and deeper than you realized. He was with you. God knows what he's doing. He has a plan for your ultimate and eternal good, and it includes pain, but it ends in glory. And he knows what you're feeling because he's feeling it with you. And through it all, he wants you to know who he is with you. Let's stand together, shall we? And musicians, would you come as we close? We're going to sing a couple of songs as we close. I want to open this altar if you want to come. Maybe there's some if-onlys you need to lay down before the Lord today. Maybe there's some if-onlys that you want to say, Lord, I've been feeling this way. I've been feeling like you didn't come through, but I just want to surrender that, Lord. I just want to know that you're here with me in my pain and that you're going to work all things for your good, that this will end in glory. It won't end in death. It'll end in glory. Lord, I want to know, I want to perceive more of your presence with me, even in those dark places, even in those painful times. Lord, let me just know that you're here with me. I want to know who you are with me. I want to know more of who you are with me. Let's not just feel like we got to race out. Come, pray, yield, surrender. If you're here today and you've never received Jesus Christ, he loves you more than any of us can ever know. But certainly you, if you're not a believer, you haven't even begun to taste of his love. If you just open your heart today and say, Jesus, I need you, he will come rushing in. If you just turn to him in an attitude of repentance, saying, I know I've messed up. I know I'm not what I ought to be, but Jesus, I need you. If you just turn to him in that simple act, he'll come. And you don't need to worry about having faith. You don't need to worry about any of that stuff. He'll begin working in you. Just open your heart. Just say, Jesus, I need you. Come. And he will. And so I'm going to ask Connie to lead us in worship, and then